The bridge of the warship Iron Vow shook so hard that Admiral Tejo had to grab the railing with both hands to stay on his feet. Somewhere behind him, a console exploded in a shower of sparks, and a young officer screamed. Tejo did not turn around. He kept his eyes on the viewport, where the sky above the Valesi homeworld was burning with the light of 1,000 ships tearing each other apart. "Shield status," he said. His voice was calm. It was always calm. 30 years of war had burned the panic out of him the way fire burns moisture out of wood. 62% and falling, sir," Captain Yuna answered from across the bridge. She was younger than most of the officers around her, but her eyes were older. She had seen her first battle at 19. She was 28 now, and had not slept more than 4 hours a night in 3 years. "We've lost the destroyer Pale Morning and the frigate Sundown. Casualty reports are still coming in." Tejo closed his eyes for 1 second. The Pale Morning. He knew her captain. A woman from Busan with 2 daughters who drew pictures of stars and taped them to the bulkheads of their mother's ship. Those pictures were atoms now, scattered across the Valesi sky, along with everything else. "Hold the line," Tejo said. "Nothing gets through to the surface." Below them, the Valesi homeworld turned slowly in the dark. It was a beautiful planet, soft blue oceans, forests that sang in frequencies humans could not hear, cities built in the canopies of trees so tall they scraped the lower atmosphere. The Valesi themselves were a fragile people. Hollow bones, thin skin. They could fly on their own world, riding thermal currents with wings that shimmered like oil on water. They had never needed to, because for 200 years the humans had done it for them. The pirate armada had come out of the deep black 3 days ago. 600 warships funded by the Rathani trade bloc, which wanted the Valesi mining rights, and did not care how many birds it had to break to get them. The Galactic Confederation had debated for 48 hours about how to respond. While they debated, the pirates burned 3 orbital stations and killed 8,000 Valesi civilians. Earth did not debate. Earth sent Tejo. The battle lasted 11 hours. When it was over, the pirate armada was shattered. 412 enemy ships destroyed. The Valesi homeworld was safe. The skies were quiet again. The cost was 4,217 human lives. Tejo stood on his bridge and read the number on his datapad. He read it once, then again, then a third time. Each person was a world of memories and hopes and love that would never exist again. He set the datapad down carefully, as though it were made of glass, and walked to the viewport. Below, the Valesi were already emerging from their shelters, spreading their wings, rising into the clear air. They did not look up at the Terran fleet still burning in orbit above them. They did not need to. The danger was over. The humans had handled it, as they always did. 3 days later, Tejo put on his dress uniform and attended the victory reception on the Valesi Capital platform. He brought Yuna. He brought the names of his dead, stored on a small crystal chip in his breast pocket, close to his heart. He did not know what he expected. Perhaps a moment of silence. Perhaps a single Valesi elder placing a hand on his shoulder and saying thank you in that musical voice they had. Perhaps just a look. An acknowledgement that something had been lost so that something else could be saved. What he got was a complaint. The Valesi Diplomatic Council informed the Galactic Confederation that the Terran fleet's weapons discharge had disrupted nesting cycles across the northern continent. 3 breeding colonies had been disturbed. The Valesi requested a formal censure against Earth for excessive use of force. Yuna heard the news, standing beside Tejo on the platform, surrounded by Valesi, who walked past them without a glance, as though the humans were furniture. She felt something crack inside her chest, not her heart, but something harder, something that had been holding her anger in place for years. "How many more of us have to die," she said quietly, "before they even learn the word thank you?" He had stopped expecting thank you a long time ago. On the Confederation Council station, Ambassador Gsok stood before the assembled delegates of 47 species and tried to speak. He was a tall man with gray temples and hands that used to be steady. They were not steady now. He held a datapad with the human casualty figures and began to read them into the record. He got to the number 1604 before the Lorathi delegate interrupted him. The Lorathi were an ancient species, cold-blooded, long-lived, and deeply proud. Their delegate, a towering figure with skin like cracked stone, spoke in a voice that carried across the chamber without effort. "These losses," the Lorathi said, "are a predictable consequence of humanity's violent instincts. Perhaps if Terran commanders exercised more restraint, fewer of their soldiers would perish in engagements that a more civilized species would resolve through negotiation." The chamber murmured, heads nodded. Not all of them, but enough. Enough to make Gsok understand that the dead sailors of the Iron Vow's fleet were not seen as heroes, or even as casualties. They were seen as evidence of a problem. The problem was humanity itself. Gsok lowered his datapad. He looked around the chamber, at the Valesi delegate who would not meet his eyes, at the Lorathi who stared at him with something between pity and contempt, at the dozens of other species who sat in comfortable silence, and let it happen. He had served in this chamber for 23 years. He had believed, truly believed, that if humanity gave enough, bled enough, sacrificed enough, the galaxy would one day see them as equals. He did not believe that anymore. That night, alone in his quarters, Gsok opened a file he had kept locked on his personal terminal for 11 years. He had written it during a dark night after another battle, another thankless victory, another row of coffins draped in the blue flag of Earth. The file was titled Sovereign Withdrawal Protocol. He read it once, from beginning to end. Then he began to update it. Outside his window, the stars burned cold and indifferent, the way they always had. But something had changed. For 200 years, humanity had carried the weight of a galaxy that did not love them. Tonight, for the first time, one man began to wonder what would happen if they simply put it down. The United Terran Parliament building sat on a hill in Seoul, overlooking a city that had been rebuilt 3 times, once after war, once after flood, and once after the first alien contact shattered every assumption humanity had ever held about its place in the universe. The building itself was plain, stone and glass and clean lines. Humanity had learned over centuries of governance that the rooms where the biggest decisions were made did not need to be beautiful, they needed to be honest. On a cold Tuesday morning, 3 months after the Valesi incident, every seat in the Parliament chamber was filled. The session was closed. No cameras, no broadcasts, no alien observers. For the first time in 200 years, humanity was going to talk about itself, by itself, without worrying about who was listening. Ambassador Gsok stood at the central podium. He looked thinner than he had 3 months ago. The skin under his eyes was dark. He had not slept well since the council session where the Lorathi delegate had dismissed 4,000 human deaths as a character flaw. He placed his datapad on the podium and began to speak. "I have served the Galactic Confederation for 23 years, he said. "In that time, I have watched humanity give everything it has to a galaxy that does not want us. Our ships defend their borders. Our doctors cure their plagues. Our engineers build their cities. Our soldiers die on their soil. And in return, we receive contempt." He paused. The chamber was perfectly silent. "I am presenting the Sovereign Withdrawal Protocol. The proposal is simple. Earth withdraws from the Galactic Confederation. Every treaty, every defense pact, every trade agreement, Every humanitarian mission, every medical program, every shared technology license, all of it. We bring our people home. We close the door, and we let the galaxy learn what it means to stand without us. The silence broke. Voices erupted from every corner of the chamber. Some shouted in support. Others shouted in horror. One elderly parliamentarian from Oslo stood and called the proposal a betrayal of everything humanity stood for. A younger representative from Lagos stood and asked how many more human children had to grow up without parents before the galaxy earned the right to call it a betrayal. President Unji sat in the high chair above the chamber floor and listened. She was a small woman with short gray hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from something patient. Before she was president, she had been a field medic. She had served in the Outer Rim Wars, pulling broken bodies out of rubble on alien worlds. She still carried a piece of shrapnel in her left hip from a rescue mission on a colony called Fesson 4. She had saved 1,100 Fessani civilians that day. The following year, Fesson 4 voted in the Confederation Council to sanction Earth for cultural contamination, claiming that the presence of human rescue teams had introduced dangerous ideas of individualism to their collective society. Yunji had never spoken publicly about Fesson 4. She did not need to. The shrapnel spoke for her every morning when she stood up and felt it shift against bone. The debate raged for 6 hours. Voices grew raw. Eyes grew red. The arguments folded over each other like waves. Those who opposed withdrawal spoke of duty. Humanity was strong, they said. Strength carried responsibility. The weaker species of the galaxy would suffer without Terran protection. Walking away would make humanity no better than the empires it had spent centuries fighting. Those who supported withdrawal spoke of blood. They listed the wars. They named the dead. They described a 200-year pattern so clear that it hurt to look at. Humanity giving, the galaxy taking, and no one, not once, saying the words that any child learns before they can walk. Then General Dowan stood. Dowan was the kind of man who filled a room by entering it. He was tall and broad, and his face had the stillness of a mountain. He had led Terran forces in more engagements than any living officer. He had written more letters to the families of dead soldiers than any human being in history. He did not speak often. When he did, people listened the way animals listen to thunder. He did not give a speech. He placed a single datapad on the central table, pressed a button, and sat down. The screen above the chamber lit up with names, human names, thousands of them, scrolling slowly, one after another. Each name was followed by a date, a location, and a cause of death. Each name was a person who had died fighting for an alien world. The list scrolled for 4 hours at reading speed. No one left the chamber. No one spoke. They just watched the names rise and fall like tides. When the list finally ended, the silence that followed was the loudest sound anyone in the room had ever heard. President Unji stood. She looked at the empty screen where the last name had faded. Then she looked at her parliament. When we gave them everything, she said, our blood, our medicine, our ships, our children, what did they give us? No one answered. No one could. The vote was called. 94 in favor, 6 against. The 6 who voted no did so with tears on their faces, not because they believed the galaxy deserved humanity's help, but because they were afraid of what humanity might become without someone to save. Jisok transmitted the message that night. It was short. Effective immediately. The United Terran government withdraws from the Galactic Confederation and all associated treaties. We wish you well. Do not follow us. The response from the galaxy was almost instant, and it was exactly what Jisok expected. The Lorathi delegate laughed. He actually laughed, a low rumbling sound that echoed through the council chamber. He called the withdrawal the best news in a century, and suggested the council use Earth's empty seat as storage space. several other species joined the celebration. The Valesi delegate expressed cautious optimism that galactic affairs would now proceed without human interference. The Rathani trade bloc sent a formal message of congratulations. Within 1 hour, Earth's seat in the Galactic Confederation Council was physically removed from the chamber floor. 200 years of service, erased like a mark on a whiteboard. Hana watched the celebrations from her office in the deep research complex beneath the Swiss Alps. She was a quiet woman with steady hands and a mind that moved in directions most people could not follow. For years, she had overseen Earth's classified research programs, technologies so advanced that the Confederation had required them to be shared under the Open Knowledge Accords. Technologies that Hana had always believed were being given away too freely to species who used them without understanding them and without gratitude. She watched the alien delegates toast each other on screen. She watched them cheer the departure of the species that had kept them alive. They have no idea, she whispered to herself, what they just lost. Then she turned off the broadcast, opened a new project file, and typed 2 words at the top. Project Dawn. They drank and sang and congratulated themselves on finally being free of the violent, emotional, troublesome humans. They did not know it yet, but they had just made the worst mistake in galactic history. The first 3 months were quiet. The galaxy moved on without humanity the way a body moves on after losing a finger. It noticed the absence, felt a phantom itch, but adjusted. Trade routes shifted. Patrol schedules were rewritten. The Confederation Council filled its agendas with new business, and Earth's name came up less and less, like a song no one remembered the words to. On the Valesi homeworld, the planetary defense grid began sending error codes. Small ones at first. A targeting sensor drifting out of alignment here, a shield generator cycling a fraction of a second too slowly there. The Valesi technicians looked at the codes and did not understand them. They had never needed to understand them. The defense grid had been designed, built, installed, and maintained by Terran engineers, who came every 6 months, ran their diagnostics, updated the software, and left without asking for anything more than a meal and a place to sleep. The Valesi contacted 3 other species for technical assistance. The Larathi said it was not their concern. The Makari said they would help, for a price the Valesi could not afford. The Torelli sent a team of their best engineers, who looked at the Terran code, looked at each other, and admitted they could not read it. It was not that the code was encrypted. It was that human engineering operated on principles so deeply layered and so far ahead of anything else in the galaxy that reverse engineering it would take decades. By month 4, the error codes were no longer small. Navigator Miso learned about the Valesi defense grid from a news feed she tried not to watch. She was sitting in the cockpit of her cargo hauler, parked in a loading dock on Titan, waiting for a shipment of ice mining equipment bound for Mars. The cockpit smelled like recycled air and old coffee. Through the viewport, Saturn's rings caught the distant sunlight and scattered it into pale gold. Miso was 26 years old. Before the withdrawal, she had been a humanitarian supply pilot. She flew medicine, food, water purifiers, and emergency shelters to alien colonies across the Outer Rim. She knew the routes by heart. She knew which species needed their cargo base pressurized to specific atmospheres, and which ones would die if the temperature dropped 2 degrees during transport. She knew the Valesi children on Colony 14, who used to draw pictures of her ship and wave at her through the landing field barriers every time she arrived. She did not fly those routes anymore. No one did. The colonies were on their own. She turned off the news feed and stared at Saturn's rings until her eyes stopped burning. Then she picked up her cargo manifest and went back to work. By month 6, the piracy problem had become a crisis. The Terran Navy had been conducting 78% of all anti-piracy patrols in Confederation space. This was not a number the Confederation had ever published, because publishing it would have meant admitting how dependent they were on a species they openly disliked. Without those patrols, the shipping lanes of the Outer Rim became hunting grounds. Pirate fleets that had spent years hiding in asteroid fields and dead systems emerged into open space and found no one waiting for them. Trade prices tripled within weeks. Supply chains that had connected hundreds of worlds collapsed like bridges with their supports removed. 3 minor species in the Outer Rim, the Pelori, the Cassith, and the Ven, faced famine for the first time in their recorded history. They sent appeals to the Confederation Council. The Council debated. The Council formed a committee. The committee requested a study. The study would take 6 months. The Pelori began to starve. On Earth, engineer Sangwoo read about the famine while eating breakfast in his apartment in Incheon. He was 34, with oil-stained hands that never quite came clean, and a mind that thought in blueprints. Before the withdrawal, he had designed defensive platforms for alien homeworlds, orbital stations, shield arrays, weapon systems. He was good at it. He was one of the best. His work had protected millions of beings who would never know his name. Now he designed for Earth alone. And something strange had happened. Without the Confederation's open knowledge accords, which had required all member species to share their technological advances, Earth was no longer giving away its best work. Without the export restrictions that limited the power of Terran weapons systems to avoid frightening the other species, Sangwoo and his colleagues were free to build without a leash. In 12 months, Terran technology had advanced more than it had in the previous 50 years. The ships coming out of Earth's dockyards were not just better, they were different. They were things the galaxy had never imagined. Sangwoo did not talk about his work. None of the engineers did. They just built, quietly, steadily, pouring into their creations all the skill and fury and grief of a species that had spent 2 centuries holding itself back for the sake of people who despised them. By month 9, the Makari Dominion made its move. The Makari were not like the other species of the Confederation. They were predators, old, patient, and brutal. They had an empire that stretched across 40 systems, built on conquest and maintained through fear. For 200 years, they had stayed within their borders, not because they lacked the strength to expand, but because expanding meant crossing paths with the Terran Navy. The Makari were many things, but they were not stupid. They knew what human warships could do. They had watched the Battle of Valesi. They had counted the pirate ships that Tejo's fleet had turned into scrap metal in 11 hours, and they had decided that patience was the wiser strategy. But patience has limits, and when the humans left, those limits vanished. Makari warships began probing Confederation borders. Small raids at first, testing the response. The Confederation fleet scrambled to meet them. The result was embarrassing. 2 border skirmishes in a single month, both losses. The Confederation commanders had been trained in academies that used Terran tactical manuals, but they had never internalized the lessons. They knew the theory, but not the instinct. They understood the formations, but not the fury. By month 12, the plague arrived. It struck the Torelli homeworld without warning, a fast-moving pathogen that attacked the respiratory system and killed within days. The Torelli were a gentle species, amphibian, soft-spoken, with enormous dark eyes that made them look perpetually sad. They had relied on Terran medical teams for epidemic response since the First Contact era. Human doctors understood xenobiology better than any other species, because humans studied everything, obsessively, relentlessly, the way they did all things. The Confederation's own medical corps tried to respond. They were overwhelmed in a week. They lacked the equipment, the training, and the sheer stubborn refusal to sleep that had made human medical teams legendary. Millions of Torelli died waiting for help that would never come. The Confederation Council held an emergency session. The chamber was tense. Delegates who had celebrated Earth's departure now sat in uncomfortable silence. For the first time in a year, someone said the word human without following it with an insult. The Larathi delegate, the one who had laughed, proposed sending a request for Terran assistance. He worded it carefully. It was not an apology. It was not an admission of wrong. It was a request, phrased in the language of mutual benefit, suggesting that Earth might find it advantageous to re-engage with Confederation affairs. The word please did not appear anywhere in the document. The request was transmitted towards Sol system. It traveled at the speed of light through relay stations that Terran engineers had built and Terran technicians had maintained, and Terran soldiers had died to protect. There was no reply. On Titan, Navigator Miso was running post-flight checks on her cargo hauler when her communications panel lit up with an incoming signal. It was old, bounced through 6 relay stations, degraded by distance, barely holding together. She almost deleted it. She got junk signals all the time, echoes from the old humanitarian networks that had not been fully shut down. But something made her open it. Perhaps habit, perhaps hope. Perhaps the part of her that still remembered the faces of the Valesi children on Colony 14. The signal was a message. It was short, recorded in a thin, trembling voice that Miso did not recognize, but somehow knew. It was Valesi, a child maybe, or an elder. It was hard to tell with Valesi voices. The translator processed the words slowly, and when they appeared on her screen, Miso felt something inside her chest go very still. The message said, "Where did you go?" 3 words, no context, no demand, no anger, just a question asked into the void by someone who had woken up one day and found that the people who had always been there were gone. Miso stared at the message for a long time. Through her viewport, Saturn continued its slow rotation, indifferent to the small griefs of small creatures on its moons. The loading dock hummed with machinery. Somewhere, a forklift beeped. She closed the message. She deleted it. She went back to her post-flight checks. But her hands were shaking, and they did not stop for a very long time. The Makari Dominion attacked on a Tuesday. Not that the day mattered to anyone except the humans who would later record it in their history books, because humans recorded everything, even the things that hurt, especially the things that hurt. The invasion came in 3 waves. The first wave hit the border systems, small colonies, mining outposts, refueling stations. They fell in hours. The second wave struck deeper, targeting the industrial worlds that supplied the Confederation fleet with materials and munitions. The third wave moved toward the homeworlds. 3 species lost their planets in the first 72 hours. The Kassith were evacuated with minutes to spare, their colony ships fleeing into deep space with nothing but the people inside them and the clothes on their backs. The Pelori were not as lucky. Their homeworld was blockaded before they could run. The Ven simply surrendered, broadcasting their capitulation on every frequency they had, hoping that obedience would buy mercy. It did not. The Confederation fleet gathered everything it had for a single decisive battle in the Tauran Corridor, a narrow passage between 2 nebulae that served as the gateway to the core systems. 46 warships from 11 species, the largest combined fleet the Confederation had ever assembled without human help. They formed a defensive line across the corridor and waited for the Makari. The battle lasted 11 minutes. When it was over, 39 of the 46 Confederation ships were destroyed. The rest fled. The Tauran Corridor was open, and behind it lay every homeworld the Confederation had left. On Earth, Ambassador Gisiak sat in his office in Seoul and listened. That was his job now. Foreign Contact Monitor. A fancy title for a man who sat alone in a quiet room and listened to the transmissions of a galaxy that was falling apart. He had access to every signal, every broadcast, every desperate plea that crossed the relay networks. He heard the Kasith evacuation orders. He heard the Pelori blockade alerts. He heard the Ven surrender. He heard the silence that followed the battle in the Tauran corridor. A silence so complete that for a moment he thought the relay network had failed. It had not failed. There was simply no one left to transmit. The formal appeal arrived 3 days later. It came through the old diplomatic channels, encoded with Confederation priority markers, addressed to the United Terran government. Jisok opened it and read it carefully, the way he read everything now, without hope, without anger, with the patient attention of a man who had learned that words mattered most when they were least sincere. It praised humanity's historic contributions to galactic stability. It referenced the shared values of cooperation and mutual defense. It expressed confidence that the current difficulties could be resolved through renewed partnership. It suggested a framework for re-engagement that would address past misunderstandings and establish a more equitable relationship going forward. Jisiok read it twice. Then he brought it to President Unji. She read it in her office, standing by the window that overlooked the Seoul skyline. The city was bright below her. Children walked to school. Markets opened. Ships rose from the spaceport on pillars of light, carrying goods between Earth and Mars and Titan and the Belt colonies. Life continued. Human life. Safe, unbroken, unbothered by the things that were happening in the dark beyond the solar system's edge. Do they apologize? Unji asked. No. Do they acknowledge what they did? No. Do they even say please? Jisok shook his head. Unji set the datapad down on her desk. She looked out the window for a long moment. Then she said, "Send no reply." A week passed. The Makari advanced. 2 more worlds fell. The Confederation Council, now meeting on a borrowed station after their capital had been overrun, sent a second message. This one was shorter, less diplomatic. The veneer of protocol was cracking, and underneath it was something raw and unfamiliar. Jisok read the second message, and noted that the word request had been replaced with urge. Progress, he supposed, of a kind. Commander Yuna, Admiral Yuna now, a title she had earned through years of service to a species she loved with a ferocity that frightened even her, received the messages on the bridge of her flagship, the Daybreak. The Daybreak was not like the ships of old. It was something new. Something that Dr. Hana's team had built in the silence of the last 18 months, when Terran engineers were finally free to create without apology. The Daybreak moved through space the way a thought moves through the mind. Fast, precise, and inevitable. Yuna read the Confederation's appeals and felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not pity. Just a hollow space where her anger used to be, filled now with a tiredness so deep it had become a kind of peace. She filed the messages. She resumed patrol of the Sol system perimeter. Earth's children were safe. Earth's soldiers were alive. That was enough. Then the third message came. It was not from a government. It was not from a council or a committee or a delegate. It was from one person, a Torelli doctor whose name translated roughly to something like quiet water. She had worked alongside human medical teams during the plague that ravaged her homeworld. She had watched human doctors work for 40 hours without sleep, injecting themselves with stimulants that made their hands shake and their noses bleed, refusing to stop while Torelli patients were still dying. She had held the hand of a human nurse named Jiwoo, who collapsed from exhaustion on the floor of a field hospital, and when woken, asked not for rest, but for the status of her patients. Quiet Water's message was not diplomatic. It was not polished. It was barely coherent in places, because she was writing in Terran Standard, a language she had learned from the human doctors she had worked beside, and her grammar was imperfect and her vocabulary was limited. But what she lacked in eloquence, She made up for in something the galaxy had never once offered humanity in 200 years of service: honesty. "I understand now why you left," she wrote. "We took from you. We took your ships and your medicine and your soldiers and your kindness, and we gave you nothing, not even words. I watched your people die for mine, and I said nothing, because everyone around me said nothing, and I thought that was how the galaxy worked. I was wrong. I am sorry. I do not ask you to come back. I only wanted you to know that someone at last is sorry." The message was forwarded through channels. It passed through the hands of communications officers, analysts, and policy advisors, each of whom flagged it as a personal communication with no strategic significance. It reached GSOC's desk as part of a routine batch of intercepted transmissions. He read it, and something inside him that had been frozen for 18 months shifted, just slightly, like ice cracking on a river in early spring. He forwarded it to President Unji with no comment. Unji read the message alone in her office, late at night, when the building was empty, and the only light came from the city below and the stars above. She read it once, quickly. Then she read it again, slowly, sounding out each imperfect word the way the Torelli doctor must have sounded them out when she wrote them. She imagined quiet water sitting in a ruined hospital on a plague-scarred world, pulling up a translation program on a cracked datapad, searching for words in a language that was not hers to express a feeling that her own people had never taught her to have. Gratitude, shame, sorrow, the understanding that something precious had been lost, and that she was part of the reason it was gone. Unji set the datapad down. She sat in the dark for a very long time, and for the first time in 18 months, the President of the United Terran Government allowed herself to cry. Not for the galaxy, not for the Confederation, not for the delegates who laughed, or the species who celebrated, or the council that removed Earth's chair within an hour of their departure. She cried for a Torelli doctor who had finally found the words that a galaxy full of civilizations could not. And she cried because she knew, in the deepest and most honest part of herself, that those words were going to change everything. Outside, the stars burned on. The galaxy bled, and somewhere in the dark, something that had been walking away began, slowly, to turn around. Admiral Tejo had been retired for 14 months when the call came. He was in his garden in Gyeongju, a small plot of land behind a small house, where he grew tomatoes and peppers and tried to remember what it felt like to care about things that did not explode. His hands were in the soil when his personal communicator chimed with a priority code he had not heard in 2 years. He looked at the dirt under his fingernails. He looked at the sky, blue and wide and safe above his home. He closed his eyes, and for one moment he allowed himself to feel the weight of what was coming, the way a man standing at the edge of water feels the cold before he steps in. Then he washed his hands, put on his uniform, and answered the call. The Mekhari Dominion had reached the borders of the Sol system. Not to invade, not yet. They were smart enough to test the water first. Their advanced fleet parked itself just outside the Kuiper Belt and sent a single transmission toward Earth. The message was calm and direct, delivered in the clipped tones of a species that had conquered 40 worlds and believed it had earned the right to speak to anyone, however it pleased. Stay inside your borders, humans. This galaxy is ours now. You abandoned it. We claimed it. There is no quarrel between us unless you make one. President Eunji listened to the transmission in the Parliament chamber. Around her sat the people who had voted to leave, the people who had watched the galaxy burn from a distance, the people who had held firm through 18 months of silence and suffering and desperate messages from species that had never once said thank you. They looked older now. Not all of them were certain they had made the right choice. None of them were certain they had made the wrong one. Eunji stood, the chamber fell silent. 2 years ago, she said, we asked what the galaxy ever gave us. But I have been thinking about that question for a long time, and I believe now that it was the wrong question. She paused. Her voice was steady, but her hands resting on the podium pressed down hard enough to whiten her knuckles. The right question is, what kind of species do we want to be? She looked across the chamber. She saw General Dallin, whose face had not changed expression in 2 years, who carried the names of the dead the way Atlas carried the world. She saw Jisok, who had written the withdrawal protocol and transmitted the farewell, and then sat alone in a room, listening to a galaxy scream. She saw young representatives who had been children when Earth first joined the Confederation, who had grown up believing that humanity's purpose was to serve, and who had spent 2 years learning what it meant to stop. We are not kind because they deserve it, Unji said. We are kind because that is what we are. We did not protect them because they thanked us. We protected them because they needed us. And they need us now more than ever. She straightened. We are going back. Not because they asked. Not because they apologized. We are going back because the galaxy is dark, and we still know how to carry fire. The vote was unanimous. Not a single dissent. Not a single hesitation. Whatever doubt had lived in the hearts of the Parliament had been burned away by 2 years of watching the consequence of absence, and what remained was something pure and hard and unbreakable. The knowledge that strength without mercy was just cruelty wearing a uniform. Dr. Hana activated Project Dawn from her laboratory beneath the Alps. She had been waiting for this moment with the patience of a woman who understood that the greatest things are built in silence. 2 years of unrestricted research. 2 years of the finest minds in human history, working without export controls, without sharing mandates, without the need to make their creations palatable to species who feared what humans could do if they ever truly tried. What they had built was beyond anything the galaxy had imagined. Ships that bent the fabric of space around themselves like cloth, weapons that did not destroy matter, but unmade it at a level so fundamental that it simply stopped existing. Shields that did not block energy, but absorbed it and converted it into fuel. Engines that folded distance like paper, moving between stars the way a person steps between rooms. 10,000 ships, the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled. Each one a masterpiece, each one a message. Admiral Tejo took his place on the bridge of the Iron Vow, rebuilt, redesigned, and renamed with the same name because Tejo believed that ships, like people, deserve the chance to finish what they started. Beside him, Admiral Yuna commanded the vanguard from the bridge of the daybreak. Behind them stretched a wall of light and steel that filled the sensors of every observation post, from Sol to the galactic core. The fleet moved. Not slowly, not cautiously, not with the measured approach of a diplomatic envoy. It moved the way sunrise moves, total, unstoppable, and indifferent to whether anyone was ready for it. The Makkari advance fleet detected the approaching armada. Their sensor operators checked their instruments. They checked them again. They recalibrated. They ran diagnostics. The readings did not change. 10,000 signatures, each one larger and more powerful than anything in the Makkari database, moving at speeds that the Makkari had believed were physically impossible. The Makkari admiral stared at his tactical display. He was an old warrior. He had broken fleets and shattered worlds, and never once felt his hands tremble. They trembled now. "What are those?" he said. No one answered him. There was no answer that would have helped. The Terran fleet did not hail the Makkari. It did not negotiate. It did not threaten. It simply arrived, the way a storm arrives, the way morning arrives, the way the truth arrives, without permission and without apology. The battle lasted 9 minutes. The Makkari Dominion fleet, every warship, every fighter, every weapons platform was taken apart with a precision so surgical it looked almost gentle. Ships were disabled, not destroyed. Crews were left alive. Escape pods were given clear corridors. The humans did not kill a single Makari soldier who was not actively trying to kill them. It was not mercy in the way the galaxy understood mercy. It was something else. It was the demonstration of a species that could have wiped the Makari from existence and chose deliberately and completely not to. Across the galaxy, sensors lit up. On occupied worlds and besieged stations, on refugee ships and hidden colonies, screens that had shown nothing but Makari red for months suddenly bloomed with new signatures. Blue. Terran blue. Human ships poured into every system, every lane, every dark corner where the Makari had planted their flag. They did not broadcast demands. They did not announce conditions. They simply began doing what they had always done, rescuing, rebuilding, healing, defending. On the borrowed station where the Confederation Council met in exile, the delegates watched the tactical display in perfect silence. One by one, the red markers of occupation blinked out. One by one, blue markers took their place. World after world after world returned to the light, like stars emerging from behind clouds. The Larathi delegate sat in his chair. His hands were on the armrests, gripping them so tightly that his stone-gray skin cracked at the knuckles. He had laughed the day humanity left. He had called it the best news in a century. He was not laughing now. He was not speaking. He was watching the display with an expression that the Larathi did not have a word for, because the Larathi had never needed a word for the feeling of realizing that you have made a mistake so vast it will outlive you. Ambassador Gisoek transmitted the final message. He stood in his office, alone, and spoke the words into the same diplomatic channel he had used to say goodbye 2 years ago. His voice was steady. His hands were still. He had rehearsed nothing. The words came from somewhere deeper than preparation. Humanity has returned. Not because you earned it. Not because you asked. We returned because you needed us. And because walking away was never who we truly were. We carried the fire when no one thanked us. We carried it when you cast us out. And we carry it now, in the dark you made, because the fire was never yours to give or take. It was always ours. He paused. We will not ask for thanks. We will not wait for gratitude. But know this, we remember, and the galaxy will never again forget what it lost the day humanity walked away. On the bridge of the Iron Vow, Admiral Tejo watched the stars clear. The Makari signatures were fading from the tactical display, retreating back to their own borders, pulling away from the light, the way shadows pull away from morning. Beside him, Admiral Yuna stood with her arms at her sides, and her chin raised, and her eyes bright with something that was not tears, but was close enough. "Do you think they will be grateful this time?" she asked. Tejo looked at her. He was old. He was tired. He had buried friends, and carried coffins, and written letters to families who would never be whole again. He had given his life to a galaxy that did not love him, walked away from it, and come back to give more. He smiled, small, tired, and impossibly kind. The smile of a man who had looked into the dark and chosen one more time to be the light. "No," he said, "but that was never the point." Outside the viewport, the galaxy turned. It was vast and cold and full of species who would argue and complain and forget and take and never, not once, understand the thing they had been given. But it was also full of stars, and tonight those stars were a little brighter, because somewhere between them, 10,000 human ships sailed in formation, carrying fire into the dark, the way they always had, the way they always would. The galaxy trembled the day humanity walked away. It wept the day humanity came back. And humanity, as it always did, simply kept walking, forward, into the stars, carrying everyone on its shoulders, asking nothing in return but the chance to be what it was.